All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Stack Strength Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Daniel DeBrocke, and today we've got a new guest on, Sebastian Oreb. Oreb, am I saying that correctly?
Perfect.
Okay, beautiful. So first off, thanks so much for jumping on, man. It's awesome to have you here. I've checked out a lot of your stuff for many years now, so it's great to actually be able to connect face to face. Can you give a brief introduction for yourself for those who maybe aren't familiar with you and some of your work?
For sure, man. Firstly, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Sebastian Oreb, as you said correctly first time, which no one ever does. Other people also know me as the Australian strength coach. Actually, people know me better that way because I guess that's what we do this with social media these days. We address people by their Instagram handles. I've been in the game for about 20 years now, starting off as a personal trainer for just general population, whoever would pay me. And then I kind of got into martial arts myself and a bit of strength training. And I was never really so great at martial arts, but I knew a lot of the martial artists. So I kind of thought, to increase my game in the strength world, I'd like to offer my services to my martial artist friends. This was before I was a powerlifter. And this was probably about 8 years into my career. So that was about 12 years ago. And I knew a few professional martial artists in Australia, and I started coaching them. And just through that, I became known in my area as the go-to guy for training the pros. Now, this was all sponsorship work as well. So I wasn't getting paid for that. All of my money came from training general population clients. And, soon one professional athlete became two, became three, and then it became my entire business, to be honest with you. Majority of the people that I see face to face are professional athletes, and that kind of came from, I guess it was just by default, just from work, putting myself out there and working with professionals. But yeah, as I said, my first athletes were martial artists, MMA fighters, professional boxers, before it got into powerlifting. Now, powerlifting was a sport that I was training but never really competed. So I thought, if I want to improve my reputation as a coach, I'm going to start competing. So I can, walk the talk, which I think is important for coaches to be able to have to an extent, of course. And so I started competing, not at a very high level. I was a 93 kilogram lifter. My first competition, I think it was about 12 years ago. And my total, I don't know how to say it in pounds, but it was 630 kilograms, which is not really good. But I was proud of it at the time.
I do kilos here as well. So no
right.
worries.
Okay. Yeah. So 630 kilograms as a 93 kilogram lifter. I don't know. I thought it was good at the time. And basically everything was good at the time because I was only comparing myself to people in my hometown, which was not very good. My ceiling was very low. And then when I started powerlifting like this, I realized that I enjoyed it and I wanted to be actually good at it. And I started exploring what was actually good. And that's when I started learning that I had a long way to go. And I to be honest, I thought it was actually impossible to achieve any of the numbers that I'm able to achieve these days. But back then I looked at those numbers and I thought it's literally impossible for me to get as much better to compete against these world-class athletes, that's for sure. But I still needed to be good at my job. That was my main focus. I wanted to be a great strength coach. And I knew the importance, the value of practicing what I preached. And so I just stuck with it. And I just kept on inching away and focusing on just getting a little bit better at a time. And I guess it's the magic formula. Consistency, effort, and 10 years does wonders. And, in that time, I was able to get myself a lot stronger. And in that time, I met some pretty amazing athletes as well. So it wasn't just limited to fighters. I then moved on to, of course, powerlifters, but also professional rugby players. In Australia, rugby is the main sport. You guys say football, and that's talking about a different type of football to us. We talk about rugby league. So I trained some of the highest profile rugby players in Australia. And then I guess the pinnacle moment in my career was 2016, meeting Hafthor Bjornsson. He came to Australia to do a seminar, to do a job with a company called SodaStream. And they asked if I could run a seminar with him. Of course, I jumped to the opportunity. And then after a day of holding the seminars with Thor, he asked me to be his coach. which blew me off my feet, because I thought these guys that are so big and strong are simply uncoachable. But of course, I jumped to the occasion. I jumped to the opportunity, and I said, whatever it takes, man, let's do it. And the first piece of work that I did with him was actually traveling over to Bangkok, where he trained for the World's Strongest Man in 2016, which was the World's Strongest Man was in Botswana, but he was actually in the middle of a job, which was filming for the movie. I don't know if you know the movie Kickboxer, the originals with Jean-Claude Van Damme. This is me showing my age. It's a really old movie. And anyway, they did an entire remake of it where Van Damme wasn't the main fighter. He was the coach. And the main fighter had to go up against all of the famous fighters. They had Fabricio Werdum, they had Vanderlei Silva, they had Mike Tyson, they had Georges St. Pierre, they had some of the best fighters in the world. And one of the bad guys in it was Thor Bjornsson. So I came with him to train as well as help him on his during his work, which it's pretty extensive work being an actor. And so I was kind of like feeding him in between his takes and making sure that he was getting all of the right nutrition and the right training in during his work, so that he could train for 2016 World's Strongest Man. 2018, he became World's Strongest Man. And this is when he and I kind of went into business with each other. I mean, we all always opened opportunities, but as he became the World's Strongest Man, this is when we released our first products together, which was to be coached by Thor and I. And that was very successful, and it did a lot of great things for my career, my reputation. Within that time, and even before then, I've also been educating. I've been running strength seminars in Australia. And then when I started working with Thor, actually in 2016, was my first time that I traveled internationally and held seminars. The first place was in UK. That was at the same time. Remember when Eddie Hall first deadlifted 500 kilograms? That was at Europe's Strongest Man 2016. That was my first international seminar that I held, which was in London. And and then from then I've just been, focusing on multiple facets of my business as an online coach, still for the masses, as in general population as well. I do work with a lot of high-level athletes face-to-face. I'm an educator, both face-to-face and online. And also, lots of other bits and pieces with other collaborations with other people. And I guess that's summing up my work from 20 years ago up until this moment.
Awesome, man. Yeah. So obviously you've been in the game for a very, very long time. So recently, actually, or I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, in 2022, you were retired from powerlifting. Is that right?
Yeah, that was kind of a little bit of an upsetting moment, as a bit by default. I was training for a competition that never happened because of COVID. And I just kept on training for this event and trying to peak. And there was a date that was set. And as everyone knows, the uncertainty of COVID lockdowns just, it changed a lot of things for a lot of people. And, I'm sure you'd know a lot about this, but it's impossible to hold a peak in strength for a long period of time. So I was actually real strong, really strong when I retired. And I don't want to say retired like I'm some type of professional athlete. We know what powerlifting is about. I'm a big fish in a small pond. Unfortunately, the athletes in powerlifting aren't paid like the athletes in NBA or soccer or any of the major sports in the world. So being good at powerlifting is only kind of like, it's good for us strength enthusiasts. So when I say I retired from the sport, it's like it wasn't a huge deal for me. It was, because it's what I love doing. But yeah, I retired mainly because I had so many commitments with family, with business. And the main thing is, for me to be strong, I look at a lot of gifted athletes that they don't have to try as hard as what I did, but damn, I tried hard. I put 20 years into being as strong as what I got, and it still wasn't the best in the world, obviously. But to be actually good and competitive and to lift the numbers that I was lifting, it was a full-time job for me. And what that meant was I was only able to commit to certain periods of time where I could say, I could turn my back somewhat from my business and from my family and really focus on powerlifting, you know. So I had to make sure, like, I was training. Most of my training sessions took about 2 hours, and a lot of the times I would split up my training 2 times per day, which would be you know, a total, like, because I spend a lot of time on warming up and my nutrition. It just takes up the entire day. And to do this was a very selfish time for me. And it's great because I had a lot of support around me. My wife, my business partners, and all the people that worked for me were able to carry my business during this time. But there's only so long that I could do this. And I was really hoping to put 20 weeks into a prep, which ended up being 40 weeks, which ended up being 60 weeks. And then I just got sick of it. It was like the competition that never happened, unfortunately. So I just said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. And I just stopped. And, you know, I don't know if that's permanent. The last time I went to a competition, which was maybe about 3 months ago, I definitely was experiencing some major FOMO. I was looking around at the guys in my weight class thinking, damn, I know I'd do well in this competition. Maybe one more last competition, but at this time, I'd have to say I'm probably about 6 months away, if I wanted to really put the time into it, 6 months away from being back to my peak strength again.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask about that was, I know that when I stopped boxing and Muay Thai, like way, way back in 2010 or 2011 or something like that, that was my entire life. Like, I go to training 3 hours in the morning, I go to work, and then I train 3 hours at night. And I did that 7 days a week. I had 0 rest days. And that, a lot of people think that's crazy from powerlifting, but in fighting, that's very common that people just train 7 days a week and they don't take a day off.
Sure.
And I remember when I stopped, I literally just didn't know what to do in my life. Like, I'd go home from work and I'd just sit and wait. I'm like, I guess I'm just waiting for the next day. And it was such a huge part of my identity that it took me quite a while to actually, you know, I was quite young at the time, which is probably, you know, didn't help, but it took me a long time to really figure out who I was, I guess, outside of fighting. And so I was wondering how that transition's kind of gone for you. I know you said you're maybe not necessarily out permanently, but, you know, even still shifting into that, hey, you know what, at the very least, I'm taking a step away for now. That does tend to be a pretty big thing. And so how has that transition kind of affected you mentally, and how has that affected your identity? What are some of the struggles you've kind of, if any, I guess?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And of course, there are many struggles. And it's something that I've never really discussed with anyone, because I've never really been asked these questions, especially by someone who I guess understands it. But yeah, for sure, man, that was my identity. I was a powerlifter. That's what I lived and breathed. You know, I'm lucky that I've got a lot of high-level athletes surrounding me, so I can still live in that world. And I'm still coaching some of the strongest guys out there, guys and girls out there, which allows me to still, you know, fulfill my purpose in life. But yeah, man, it's heartbreaking, you know, just knowing that every time I step under that barbell, it feels a lot heavier now. You know, like you know, I was at a high level in untested federations, and there's a lot of things that go with that. And that's all stopped as well. So another reason why I stopped was health related as well. I wanted to make sure, you know, I turned 40 years old, and you know, and I know that there are some incredible athletes out there that have continued into their 50s and beyond. But there's also a lot of people that haven't. And it wasn't by their choice either. Some people's lives have ended short well before they were due. And it's a sad thing. So, you know, I'm a father of 2 girls. And so I kind of, my life purpose has shifted a lot. So although it's really upsetting, you know, to stop doing the sport that I love, it's definitely, I do have, you know, I can rest easy knowing that I'm doing it for the right reasons. But yeah, man, you hit the nail on the head. I come into the gym and it's like, I'm not training for anything right now. And when people ask me how my training's going, it's definitely not as enjoyable as what it used to be. I'm not sure if you've seen a video of me throwing my belt across the room when I missed the lift. That's how it used to be. I really used to take it seriously. And I look back at that and I don't have that passion anymore because I'm not training for anything. But I loved having that passion. as shitty as that looked when I threw my belt and I got angry, I like to think that I've matured a lot since then, because I know that's pretty shitty to be around when people throw tantrums when they miss lifts in the gym. But that's how much I loved it. And now it's just not that same passion. If I miss a lift now, it's like, who cares? I don't really care. But yeah, for sure, man. Look behind me. I own this place. This is my gym, and this is my life. This is 20 years of me collecting all of the best equipment that you can get. Well, for me personally, like all of the machines and dumbbells and barbells and plates and everything was at the time that I purchased everything was what I was always wanting to own when I was younger, growing up and saying, wow, look at the competition gear. I'd love to own that one day. Look at those dumbbells. They're the best. I'd love to own that one day. And then finally, I was able to chip away. This was probably over about 7 years of just collecting all of the best gym equipment until I now own everything. So, it's like what they say, all the gear and no idea. So now it's like I've got everything here and I come in to train and it's just not the same. But at the same time, training is still part of my life. I understand that there's so many more benefits to training than just being great at powerlifting. So I make sure it's not about motivation, because that doesn't exist at the moment. It's about discipline. And I guess that's a topic that a lot of people have covered a lot, especially at the highest level. You can't possibly be motivated that whole time. And that's not why we do it. We do it because we want to be great. So I understand that. And 20 years of training this way, I've developed a lot of great habits that just say, it doesn't matter if I'm not feeling good, still going to do it anyway. But for sure, man, from a mental standpoint, it hurts. It definitely hurts. And I wish I could still say, yeah, I'm as strong as what I've always been. And I'm training for a purpose. I'm going to compete soon. That would be amazing. But, I've got other things now, so I just need to accept it. And I have accepted it.
Yeah, it's definitely tough, but I mean, it definitely makes sense as well that, if you have other things going on in your life, like you've got a really successful business, you have a family, you have daughters. It sounds like you've got a really strong social network, which I think can be something that's really, really important when you are transitioning, because I mean, at the time that I was done, I was a young kid, so obviously I didn't have a business, I didn't have anything, but also I didn't really have any friends because everything that I was doing was just fighting. And so it sounds like, well, this is kind of transitioning for you. You have a lot of other really amazing things that are already cemented to kind of fill the gap or fill the void, so to speak, which is pretty awesome. But I wanted to touch on a couple of things actually that you mentioned. You did touch on health, and I remember reading an article of yours from like way back in 2020 where you talked about kind of how people like to dichotomize health versus performance. And the reality is like, okay, well, if you're healthy, then you can train longer, and if you train longer, you're probably going to be better. So why are we kind of having these conversations about like them not being the same thing? And I wanted to, I guess, just get your feedback, and if you could expand on that kind of idea, because it's something that a lot of people talk about, but I think it's a little bit narrow-sighted when they usually discuss it.
For sure, and it's a really fine line between the two, because I still believe that, with extreme sports, which is what I consider high-level strength sports, I do consider it extreme. The things that high-level athletes put themselves through to be the best, it does push those boundaries, and it definitely can become unhealthy. And a lot of the times it is unhealthy. But something that I've seen, and I have been fortunate enough to say that I've worked with some of the strongest athletes on the planet, is, there's people that come and go, they're in it for a short time, and they, let's talk about steroid use. They just pump as much as they can for the time that they're competing, and they want to get stronger. They pump more juice. And to be honest with you, I believe that the best athletes, the ones that have been doing it the longest, actually don't take as much gear as the ones that are kind of like just came out of nowhere and they're young and energized, and they're just taking so much steroids to get into where they are, but it's not long lived. They're not able to sustain that level of poor health, because it's not healthy to take the amount of performance enhancements that a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people do take. And a better approach and this is, like I've experienced this firsthand, not just with my athletes, but with myself as well. You want it so bad, it's like you're willing to do everything that it takes, and you do a lot of stupid things. And had I had my time again, I think that I would have done it a lot slower. And this was definitely where I was in the last, especially I'd say the last 5 to 7 years, and that's when I really started excelling as a powerlifter. Was when I slowed down everything and stopped thinking that I need to have it now, and started understanding the benefits of longevity, and realizing that if we stop, and it's not just, I don't want to just talk about steroid use. I guess that's the best way to illustrate how this sport can be unhealthy. But it's also, training methodologies. When people try and beat themselves up too much in the gym, I see it all the time, and I'm a culprit of it as well. Trying to hit numbers that you just have no right putting on the bar, and failing lifts all the time, and causing injuries. And this is one of the biggest downfalls of a lot of lifters, is as it comes to competition time, when they set too many dates to compete, they want these certain numbers. They have these numbers in their heads, and they're unrealistic about their goals. And I'm not saying these numbers are impossible to achieve eventually, but in the short time frame that athletes have given themselves, wanting to compete and wanting to come first and wanting to beat the best, and a lot of the numbers that they're attempting, this is what's causing failed lifts, and this is what's causing a lot of injuries. So it's not just health to the body, as in, health to your heart and your arteries and your brain, health to your joints and your muscles as well. So a lot of people are forced out of the sport because, they went too hard, too fast, and they injured themselves. So everything that I'm about, I'm 41 years old now, and I do, I am very lucky that I can say that I'm friends with a lot of people that are as old and older than me, and are stronger than me, and have been doing it for longer than me. And these are some of the trends that these people can talk about, and is the long game. And that's the only reason these people are able to be as good as what they are, is because they've been able to be smart enough to put the time into it. And if you don't factor in health with that equation, it's not going to work. Something's going to break. Hopefully it's not your heart. Hopefully it's not your arteries. Hopefully it's not your brain. It's a better case scenario to say tearing a muscle or injuring a joint. But at the same time, this is what my focus is now, is whenever I work with people, health is at the forefront. And I think that that should be a lot of everyone's priorities when it comes to long-term success in anything, actually.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And a lot of the times when I hear people talking about PEDs, people will say it as if it's like some sort of cheat code. And they'll be like, oh, well, they're using PEDs, and so they can just kind of do they can eat whatever they want. They can train as, suboptimally as they want. But it's like, in my opinion, it's actually the opposite. It's like, if you use PEDs, you have to be more dialed in with your nutrition. You have to be more dialed in with everything, because the risk goes up so much higher. And so a lot of the guys that I know who do use PEDs, and granted, that's obviously like selection bias, just because the people I know obviously are probably going to have more similar values to myself, but they're pretty cautious about their use, and they don't really abuse it, and they make sure they eat really healthy, and they have all of these other things lined up. So like, they don't drink, they don't do like recreational drugs, they don't do any of these other things. They watch their diet, they watch their stress, they do cardiovascular training to make sure they're healthy. So it's like, it's a whole lifestyle around it, not just like this little cheat code that you can use to sort of bypass all the effort and work. And so, yeah, it's interesting, the perception of it, until you get on drugs sometimes, and then you're like, oh shit, it's not what I thought necessarily. So
man, and you're so right with everything that you're saying. And unfortunately, it's because the topic is taboo that people don't speak about it enough. Unfortunately, and I've been part of that as well, because I've never wanted to get the wrong message across, especially to children. I've worked with some pretty high profile athletes, and there's a lot of young children that are so heavily influenced by these people. And when they hear that there is use of steroids, it's heartbreaking for these kids, which is why a lot of people that know me, they know that I don't like to speak about this topic a lot, because I don't want to give the wrong message across. But that's to its detriment as well, because there needs to be more people that that spread the message that it's not just something that you can just take more drugs and just keep on getting better. There are consequences to this. And that's right. The good guys actually know this. They are aware, and it is catching on that, burning the candle at both ends just not going to work. So going and taking your performance enhancements, supplementation, and then going out and partying at the same time, that's just not how it works. So it is a good topic. Then it needs to be discussed, especially by experts in this field, which by no means do I think I'm an expert when it comes to this type of topic. I do have experience with working with people on this, and I think it's something that needs to be discussed more, so people are aware. More juice isn't better. That's actually the opposite. Learning how to do it properly is I guess something that the world needs to be educated on.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely agree, man. So I guess shifting gears, I wanted to talk a little bit about training raw versus training with wraps. So how do you approach transitioning an athlete from raw to wraps? Because like I've seen athletes who will be squatting like 150 kilos in wraps, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you need to be squatting like a good 300 kilos. I'm thinking of like, let's say 100 or 120 kilo athlete, and
Yeah.
I'm like, you should be squatting at least 300 kilos before you're thinking about transitioning to wraps, in my opinion.
Yep.
But like,
Yep.
do you have any guidelines on, at what point you might want to transition, what some of the fundamentals that need to be, or some of the boxes that need to be checked off prior, and then how you actually go about transitioning athletes?
It's interesting because there's not really any absolutes that I use, like you need to hit a certain number before we can transition into anything. But the fact is, even for my wrapped lifters, we do majority of our work raw. To be strong in equipment, you need to be strong without equipment first, and during as well. A lot of the times people develop so many weak points and injuries because they transition to equipment exclusively in their training, which, too much specificity is not a good thing. Specificity, even when we're talking about without equipment, specificity alone doesn't strengthen all of the attributes you need to be good at that sport. Okay, which is why we need variation, and we need to periodize, and we need to understand these concepts. But when it comes to wraps, for myself personally, the only reason I started with wraps is because all of the good competitions in Australia were with wraps. So the first time I held an Australian record was with sleeves. It wasn't very big. It was in the 90 kilogram class. I think the total was 730 kilograms. 770. I don't even know what it was. It wasn't amazing. And one of the owners of one of the federations, the Wrapped Federation, came up to me and said, why didn't you use wraps? You would have got the record there. And I thought, well, I don't care about the record there. That's not real. Like I was kind of like on the team where wraps are cheating, and it doesn't count, man. This is raw strength. I don't give a shit about that. Until it came to a point where literally the best athletes in my country, the strongest athletes, were competing in the competition where they use knee wraps. So at that point, my squat was 260 kilograms raw, and then I attempted wraps for the first time. This was in 2014, and I had really great guidance for the use, which was Ernie Lillibridge Sr. He was the one that taught me how to squat. And a lot of the training principles and programming principles behind it, as well as how to wrap knees. And the first time I wrapped my knees, I could squat 260 kilograms raw. When I added wraps, I attempted 265 kilograms and I missed it. And that's because you can't just expect to add wraps and all of a sudden you're a better lifter. There's a lot that goes into the technique of using wraps. And that's a lot of the things that I teach. But for me, if I never competed in wrapped competition, I would have never used wraps. The only reason I did it was to compete with the best athletes. I'm very competitive by nature. But if people come to me and they don't compete, I won't recommend wraps because I think that it's not how you strengthen your body optimally. I don't think that it makes you weaker. I think that there is definitely ways of using wraps and periodizing your wrapped work to get the most out of your training. But I'll never use wraps exclusively with anyone. When it comes to how strong do you need to be, I don't really have a strength standard. I'm more about training morale. So when people come to me, young athletes come to me and they say, I want to compete, because they, out of the enjoyment, we'll first figure out what competitions are suitable for these athletes. And if they're an absolute beginner and they're looking to do wrapped competition, I still don't have a number. I guess a lot of these things come intuitively because I've been doing it so long, where I'll be able to recommend when someone's ready or not. And I don't think it's just about how strong that they are. I've got girls that have wanted to introduce wraps and they're not strong. A lot of the girls that I'm talking about, when I say not strong, I'm talking in absolute terms. They're still able to squat triple body weight. I'm talking about 50-kilogram girls that can squat 140, 150 kilograms that are looking to transition in wraps. That's definitely strong enough. So it's not the number. I guess from a percentage standpoint, triple bodyweight squat is pretty damn elite. But I still don't have values for that. I guess I just know when someone's ready, when they understand the fundamentals and proper squatting technique, understand how to stay tight under load, how to brace, how to control a weight, and they prioritize these things. It's a lot more about maturity as a lifter and understanding of technique than exactly how much number they have on the bar. Of course, it comes into play, but I just don't have those exact values. That's all.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I should have been a little bit more clear. A lot of the times I'll use kind of general strength as a broad way to,
For sure,
evaluate that as kind of a proxy for their technical ability, experience, things like that. But no, that definitely makes sense. And so, can you talk a little bit about variation then? Because you touched on it there as well. But in terms of utilizing variation in training, whether it's wrapped, unwrapped, whatever, to one, like help progress people in strength, but then two, also to help people just enhance their injury risk management protocol, so enhance their orthopedic health and things like that.
Totally. So this is a huge priority with all of my long-term coaching. I guess one word that I use to sum up everything is balance. So unfortunately, when it comes to peaking for competition, you're going to be extremely unbalanced with your approach to training. You're going to be very specific. You're going to be mastering the skills of your sport. You're going to be mastering the equipment that you use. And this creates a lot of the imbalances, which means in the off season, further away from competition, we want to be working on the attributes that we can't develop through specificity. Okay, so balance is a word that I say. It's like kind of in line with perfection. It's something that you'll never achieve, but it doesn't mean you're not working towards it. So when it comes to balance, I have my own formulas. It's very simplistic formulas. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. And it applies for everything. So with our belted training, we do 50% of our work belted, 50% unbelted. With our knee wrap training, we do 50% of our squats with wraps, 50% without. With our exercise prescription, we do 50% upper body, 50% lower body, 50% push, 50% pull. So these are very generalized numbers. You can never be exact with any of this. But if you have a general understanding, then it's pretty easy to see that if we're spending 100% of our time during competition doing the specific lifts with equipment and with a belt and with knee wraps and with the specific techniques such as a low bar squat and a sumo deadlift, if that's the competition style, that's 100% of our work is there in the last month or two, or whatever the peaking duration is. Then we need to spend a little bit longer, a little bit more time on being unbalanced in the other direction. So spending no time with wraps, spending no time with the belt, spending no time on the exact competition lifts, and using pure variation, further away from competition. And every lifter is different. It's not like we have an exact formula that says, when you're 8 weeks out, you need to be doing, this much specificity, this percentage. Those percentages don't really work. And we've also got some athletes that like to keep some degree of specificity as they're further away from competition. But it's just something that, as an overlying principle, is understanding balance. So with a bench press, this is barbell work from a horizontal plane. So we also like to use 50% of our planes on our upper body training in the horizontal and 50% in the vertical. A lot of the upper body pressing work is with a barbell. So we like to use 50% of our work with barbell, 50% with dumbbells. Again, these figures aren't exact. It's pretty impossible to be exact and to be perfect with any of these values, but it's a general overview. So I've got I guess it's an 8 kind of exercise category model. Okay, so 4 of the exercise categories are upper body, 4 are in the lower body. The upper body is horizontal push-pull, that's 2, and then vertical push-pull. The lower body, so we kind of do, our upper body work is 25% on each of those categories. Our lower body work, we've got the squat pattern, and we've got knee dominant squat variations. And squats aren't limited to barbells on the back. We've also got machines that allow it. We've also got unilateral variations that allow a knee dominant squat pattern. And then 50% of that squat work is hip dominant squat patterns. So to generalize it, you could say a low bar squat is hip dominant, even though the knee extensors are involved. And a high bar squat is more knee dominant, even though the hip extensors are more involved. So this is another reason why it can't be perfect, because just because you're doing a hip dominant variation doesn't mean you're not training the knee extensors. And then we've got the bend pattern or the posterior chain, which I split up into 2 categories. One is hip extension and the other is knee flexion. So the 4 for the lower body is knee dominant squat, hip dominant squat, hip extension, posterior chain, knee flexion. And 25% will go into each of those categories. So if we break it up into 8 categories, we've got 12.5% on each of those categories. Just as a general formula, and then just having that in the back of our mind. I don't have a checklist where we say, we've already hit 10%, so we were only allowed, a certain amount of percentage. That's not how it works. It's just a general guideline that sits over the top of my head when I'm considering someone's long-term programming. As we're further away from competition, it's more varied. As we're closer to competition, it's more specific. And in between, we kind of like mash it in so that we get a balanced amount of all of these categories, so that at the end of the competition time, you're not so imbalanced that you're causing injuries or you're causing too many weak points. Weak points are often what causes the injuries. And this is where I've been pretty successful with. I follow these principles for all sports. So something that I learned from a fellow by the name of Al Vermeil. He was the strength coach for the Chicago Bulls in the Michael Jordan era. He was also the strength coach for San Francisco 49ers when they won one of their championships. He's the only coach on the planet that holds 2 championship rings from different sports, high-level sports we're talking about. And something that I learned from an interview that I heard from him is he was asked the question on how he trains his different athletes differently to each other. So these athletes are more team sport athletes rather than strength sports, which is what I specialize in. But the same rules apply. And the question that was asked was, how does he train them differently? And his answer was that he doesn't actually train them differently. The objective of all of these athletes was essentially to get there the fastest with the most. So his job as a strength coach isn't to think about how they're going to be throwing a ball or kicking a goal or any of these specific skills. That's up to the skills coach. His job is to get his athletes moving well, to be strong, and to be free from injury. And understanding this allowed me to work with athletes of all different sports. And when athletes like Thor Bjornsson came to me and said, will you be my coach? It's like, I know I've got what it takes. I'm not a strongman. I've never coached a strongman athlete. I'm relying on, and I was very lucky that he was very gifted in strongman events. But where I helped him majorly was in splitting up his training so it was a more balanced approach, so that it wasn't a lot of the strongmen out there at the highest level, especially, they do focus a lot on event work, which is a very intelligent way of training because the events, that's where strongman is at. But that's structural balance isn't factored into that training. And it was the addition of that type of work with Thor that allowed him to excel. And I just knew that I didn't have to try and reinvent the wheel. Whenever I work with professional athletes, as I said, I work with footballers, and I'm not a footballer. I've worked with all types of martial artists. Yeah, like I dabble in martial arts, but I'm not good. I'm definitely not competent enough to step in the ring or be a professional by any means. But I still understand that my objective isn't to teach these athletes how to play their sport. My objective is to get their body strong, moving well, and free from injury. And then it's up to the skills coach to work on the specificity that's required. The only sport that I'm really good at with the specificity component is powerlifting. because that is my sport. But apart from that, that's the principles that I've used very successfully. And that's where I know that if any athlete came to me and asked if I can get them stronger, the answer is hell yeah, absolutely. Following those principles and really keeping it simple. So when I first, remember I said my first athlete was a martial artist. The first things that I did, I was very intimidated by this guy because he was my first professional athlete. So I thought, wow, I need to really come up with something special and wow this client of mine. And so I had him doing all sorts of snatches and clean and jerks and all of these power movements that I'd never performed in my life. But I just thought that this is how you need to train if you're going to be a pro. You're going to train like a pro, which was so damn wrong because these athletes aren't good at weightlifting movements. Training with weights is generally not what team sport athletes or martial artists are good at. They're good at their sport. So it took me a long time to understand that keeping it simple with these principles, so following those basic movement patterns, was a much more successful approach. And working towards achieving structural balance by splitting it up into those 8 categories was my number one tool for maintaining balance across the entire training year. And that's worked very successfully for me for all of the athletes that I train.
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of the times, especially strength coaches who are kind of limited to, let's say, powerlifting or weightlifting or even strongman, but to a lesser degree, I guess, you kind of forget that lifting, because for us, lifting is the sport, our training is the sport. Yep. Whereas for other athletes, because I remember, I'm not sure if you saw this, but forever ago, there was a video of Usain Bolt doing power cleans that went viral and it just looked horrendous. And everyone's like, oh my God, if he just learned how to clean properly, he'd be even faster. And I'm like, even faster than the fastest man on the planet? What are you talking about? You really want to redirect all of his training and recovery resources at something that is not fucking important almost at all. He just needs to do the action. That's good enough. And I think sometimes that's lost. But I guess to kind of get off of this tangent, I wanted to get your perspective on a little bit more of the soft skills of coaching, because realistically, we're not just dealing with input and output equations. People have stuff that goes on in their lives, whether it's COVID-19 and how that affected people losing their jobs, getting a raise, all sorts of, good and bad things. And I wanted to know how you go about coaching people through some of those kind of ups and downs, how you keep them engaged, how you might have some of those conversations when things are going well, when things aren't going well, and how you kind of keep them, I guess, disciplined and staying consistent throughout those, I guess, just throughout life.
Yeah, that's such an important factor to consider when we want someone's long-term success is external stresses. And as you've put it, the soft side of coaching, it's so hugely important. And it's, a lot of people are very invested in learning about programming principles and physiology and anatomy and all of these really important facets of being a great coach and being a great athlete. But that's only a small portion because we're dealing with people. And, training with weights is a stressor. And the body doesn't recognize, when it's taking on too many stresses, it doesn't recognize where it's coming from. And eventually, if you've taken too much, something's going to break. So as much as we promote the benefits of strength training and training with, resistance training, it can be detrimental to the individual's health if there are other stresses that we're not dealing with at the same time. So yeah, emotional stress, financial stress, relationship stress. There's all of these factors can impact the way that we perform in the gym. Now, here's the skill as a coach. What skill must you possess? A lot of the times, especially when we're working with a new athlete, a lot of those topics are none of our damn business. So to ask an athlete, when you first start working with them, how they're going emotionally, how they're going financially, and all of these factors, they may not be so comfortable, sharing these details with us. So, above all else, whenever I'm working with any of my clients, one of my objectives is to become their friend. And of course, it's not by being forceful and telling people we need to go and hang out and we need to, I need to get in contact with your family and make sure that everything is right. of course it happens organically just by being a good person and understanding, having people skills, having good conversation skills. In the meantime, another analogy that I like to use that's a lot more obvious is working with a female during their menstrual cycle. A lot of people ask the question, do we need to factor that in, and do we need to train them differently? Are women stronger or weaker at different phases of their menstrual cycle? And my answer to that is, I don't fucking know. And a lot of the women that I work with don't want to share that information with me either. So therefore, what do? I can ask, and a lot of people work this way. You ask people how they're feeling for the day, and a lot of the times people are just going to respond with, yeah, I'm feeling good, even though they may not be. So a principle that I have when it comes to programming, when it comes to training someone face-to-face is understanding the principle that you need to earn the right to add weight to the bar. So I'll use the number, for example, if I'm going to squat 300 kilograms for the day, I know how 100 kilograms should look and feel. Of course, I can squat 100 kilograms in my sleep, but some days it's harder than other days, and then I'll know how each increment should look and feel after that. And if it's not there for the day, then it's just not there. And we don't have to be so rigid in sticking to the exact program that's been prescribed. And this is how I work with a lot of people with their external stresses when they are not able to communicate those stresses with me. Sometimes people aren't aware of whether they're stressed out or not, or whether they're having a good day or not. So this is where, as a coach, it's also important to understand, and for everyone, and this is something that everyone can understand and implement immediately, is you don't have to stick to the program exactly how it's written. That's a guide, and we'd like for the program to be met, all of the protocols to be met. But at the same time, if it's not there for the day and we try and force it, this is where, things can break. So having an understanding, and this also takes experience. As I said, I've been working with people for 20 years. So I've got a very good intuition and good understanding of when people are having a good day or not. And I'm using the warm-up sets to be able to make that call for myself. When things aren't looking good, it could be a good opportunity to make a change or to slow it down. If someone's been broken up with by their partner and it's none of your damn business, it doesn't have to be. We can tell by how the weight's moving, how the body's moving. And if you can't tell, you're not a bad person. This does take experience. It does take a lot of time with working with people to understand how the individual works. It's not as if we can measure the bar speed and say that every single person needs to be moving at this speed, because every lifter lifts at different speeds as well. So it's not as if we can measure it, with the speed of the bar. It's the speed of the bar for that individual, which means we need to be spending enough time with that individual to know how they move, how they react to what incremental increases they respond best to with their warm-ups. So it's a long-winded answer, but these are the factors that I consider when it comes to the soft side of coaching. So to answer the question more simply, become their friend and get to know them. How long does that take? It takes time, right? So there's one part of it. The second part of it is when all else fails, when you don't understand, when you're not their friend yet, and you're not on that personal level where they're willing to share these personal thoughts or feelings with you, understand that principle. Earn the right to add weight to the bar. It's not just simply, recommending warm-up protocols and telling them to go and do it, and they have to hit the numbers that's prescribed on the program. It's understanding how that individual moves and how they respond to whatever incremental increases that you're providing. But once you do, if you follow those two principles, becoming their friend and earning the right to add weight to the bar, you're going to go a lot further with their long-term progression, and also making sure that you don't, make their issues worse. You don't want to injure someone by making them just simply stick to the program. And this is how injuries can occur, because nothing's linear. We're not just going to continue getting stronger and stronger every time we come under the bar. So, experience is the way that we learn all of those things.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that I've kind of, I think it's kind of worked in my favor is I'm pretty big. I'm like 227, 225, or sorry, 125 kilo-ish. Yeah, something like that. Anyways, and like I'm all tatted up. And so usually like if someone sees me, they're like, oh, intimidating, scary guy or whatever, right? But then I get on and I'm like, almost always people after like the first check-in, people are like, wow, you're like really soft spoken. You always, make me feel really good about my training, this, that, and the other. And it's like, and so I think that kind of works for me in this sense. But then at the same time, I also try and set that as like an expectation. So, hey, your training doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a lot of different inputs. Now, I'm not saying you have to share personal stuff with me, but if you're going through a rough time, just tell me, hey, kind of having a rough time at home or work, whatever, and we can just leave it at that. And then it kind of sets that like it sets it up in their head, like, oh, this is normal. This is how athletes, work. And so, I can kind of, it opens up the conversation a little bit more. And so I found that that's kind of helped, plus just being a little bit more soft spoken when I'm chatting with them, instead of like, I think what people expect is they expect you to kind of yell at them a bunch. And exactly like you were saying, they expect a lot of rigidity. They expect this really extreme thing, when in reality, you're like, no, let's just do squats today and see how you feel. And then we'll maybe do something else and then go from there,
And man, this is so true. At the highest level, you start to learn that all of these big, intimidating, strong guys aren't really like, yeah, they look like that on the outside. And I'm sure if it came down to it, you'd be able to look after yourself extremely well. But I think that's what gives a lot of these big, strong guys the confidence to know that they don't need to be tough on the outside. And a lot of these guys understand that nothing's linear. And as you said, being a professional athlete, people look at you and they think it's going to be 100% hardcore. But professional athletes at the highest level understand that there's ups and downs. And that's something that a lot of people will learn. Like, this is the first time I've ever seen you. I wouldn't have been able to guess that you're 125 kilograms. And yeah, man, you're very gently spoken. But at the same time, I'm kind of used to that. I've got a lot of super heavyweights that I work with, and they're all super gentle and softly spoken. And in fact, a lot of the super heavyweights that I deal with, I don't want to say they have the most problems out of all of the lifters that I work with, but they've got a hell of a lot of problems and stresses, and they need to be treated delicately a lot of times, man. It's not just about go hard or go home or being the tough guy. So it's a huge factor that we must consider. And yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. So I know we are kind of almost coming up on that hour mark. I just wanted to, if you could give the listeners like some of the practical takeaways, just a little bit of a recap with some of the stuff we talked about, a couple things that they can take home from this conversation.
Sure. So I guess some of the points that I guess have stood with me over my career that have led me to the most success was I guess we can sum it up with that interview with Alva Meal. When it comes to coaching athletes of different sports, as a strength coach, is to not focus too much on teaching them the skill of the sport. That's not our role. And how should different athletes work towards being good at their craft is by playing the skill, like Usain Bolt. He's good at running because he runs a lot, not because of the clean and jerks that he was doing. But to train that athlete to get there the fastest with the most. How do we do that? Well, I've got my 8-step model. So horizontal push-pull, vertical push-pull, knee dominant squat, hip dominant squat, hip extension for posterior chain, and knee flexion, 12.5% on each of those, however you want to calculate that, because that's not to be done in an individual session. That's to be done over the long-term plan. Have a balanced approach to all your training. So if you want to use equipment, make sure you train 50% of your work unequipped, whether that's a belt or knee wraps as well. And understanding, I guess, that principle, earn the right to add weight to the bar. We don't have to be perfect. We're human beings, and we aren't perfect. And we don't progress linearly either. So understanding that the program and programming is another skill as well. And this is why I factor in a lot of deloads as well. And it's kind of like, it's not like a set structure, but it's understanding that humans aren't just strong every single time they come into the gym, and no one expects you to be either. So I guess those are some of the points that have helped me a lot in my career. Hopefully that can help some of the viewers today.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, man. So where can people find you, and are you working on any projects or anything like that you wanted to shout out?
For sure. I guess on all of my work, at Australian Strength Coach. So Instagram is where most people can find me. That's the best place. Of course, I've got other email addresses and other handles as well, but Instagram, so at Australian Strength Coach. There's a few things that I'm working on. I run online seminars for those who don't live in Australia. So that's a Strength System International Certification. That's all in my bio, the Linktree link in my bio on my Instagram page. And I've also got programming software for personal trainers and coaches that want to write better programs for their athletes. And that's something that I've spent a lot of time and money on over the last 2 years. That's what I have been working on while I've been retired as a powerlifter. And that's all available through my Linktree link in my bio. Now, this isn't all for sales. In my Linktree link, I've also got a lot of great video tutorials that are for free, a lot of articles that are for free. So if you have the time, you don't have to pay me a single cent, and you can learn a hell of a lot. If you just go to my Instagram page, at Australian Strength Coach, go to the Linktree link in my bio and just go and have an explore. You don't have to pay me a cent, and you can learn a hell of a lot. So I hope you guys get some value out of that.
Awesome, man. So make sure you go give him a follow. All that stuff's going to be linked up in the show notes. Click on it. Follow him on Instagram. Also, he's got a YouTube that he didn't mention. I'm going to be adding that in there as well. Definitely has tons of articles, tons of free content that he puts out on a regular basis. So make sure you go check it out. Sebastian, man, it's been great chatting. Thanks so much for jumping on.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel. And hopefully we can do more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.